You Are Not a Frog. Life hacks for doctors and busy professionals who want to beat burnout and work happier. I'm Dr. Rachel Morris. I'm a GP, turned coach, speaker and specialist in teaching resilience, and I'm interested in how we can wake up and be excited about going to work no matter what. I've had 20 years experience of working in the NHS, both on the front line and teaching leadership and resilience. I know what it's like to feel overwhelmed, worried about making a mistake, and one crisis away from not coping. 2021 promises to be a particularly challenging year. Even before the coronavirus crisis, we were facing unprecedented levels of burnout. We have been compared to frogs in a pan of slowly boiling water, working harder and longer, and the heat has been turned up so slowly that we hardly notice the extra long days becoming the norm, and have got used to the low-grade feelings of stress and exhaustion. Let's face it, frogs generally only have two choices: stay in the pan and be boiled alive, or jump out of the pan and leave. But you are not a frog, and that's where this podcast comes in. You have many more options than you think you do. It is possible to be master of your own destiny and to craft your work and life so that you can thrive, even in the most difficult of circumstances. Through training as an executive and team coach, I discovered some hugely helpful resilience and productivity tools that transformed the way I approached my work. I've been teaching these principles over the last few years as the Shapes Toolkit programme, because if you're happier at work, you'll simply do a better job. In this podcast, I'll be inviting you inside the minds of friends, colleagues and experts, all who have an interesting take on this, so that together we can take back control to thrive, not just survive in our work and our lives, and love what we do again. It's really great to have with me on the podcast today Scott Chambers. Now, Scott is a team coach and facilitator. He's a specialist in psychological safety, and he really enjoys helping teams work better together. So welcome, Scott. It's brilliant to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, well, so am I, because this subject of psychological safety is one I've been thinking about a lot. And it seems that you can't go anywhere without reading or hearing about psychological safety these days.
Yeah, it's certainly come into management speak. So increasingly, when we talk to people about it, they already know the term. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't actually understand what it means. So there's a lot of kind of what they call amateur psychologists that are using the term to describe a range of things. But yes, the great news is that people are now starting to take this seriously.
Yeah, and I wanted to get you on the podcast because we'd had a conversation about psychological safety, and for a long time with my work with teams and things like that, I've just noticed that is the thing that is missing, and we've noticed that it's missing throughout the NHS. It's missing in other organisations, particularly where there's sort of high stress jobs and people are under a lot of pressure. But it's so crucial for performance, and it strikes me as it's something that's quite enigmatic, quite difficult to get hold of and quite difficult to build for a team. So I thought, when I heard you talking about it, I thought, right, I need to get Scott on the podcast, because there's no easy answer, but it'd be really nice if there was some things we could start to take away and start to do already that are going to make our lives better at work. So let's start with the definition. What do we mean when we talk about psychological safety?
Well, actually, it's the start point, and Amy Edmondson, I will refer to her a few times, so I might as well get that out the way now. so
Amy Edmondson, tell us who she is.
She's the author of I guess the definitive book in this domain, The Fearless Organization. She's the Novartis Professor of Psychology, thank you very much, at Harvard University. And she defines it as that no one will be there'll be no detrimental impact for anybody speaking up, either with ideas and questions, but also potentially with criticisms and observations about what's not working well. So it is this idea of everybody's voice can be heard, and in speaking up, I am not in any way kind of hampered or disadvantaged. And we all know how sometimes it doesn't feel like that in some teams. Maybe our voice isn't heard because there's too many other voices in the room, too much noise. Maybe there's a strong personality. Maybe if I take it personally, if you say, well, I'm sorry, Scott, I'm not sure that that project's on time or going to, I might start to defend it just from a personality point of view. So there's lots of things that if you like, without any necessarily malevolent intent, can get in the way of psychological safety.
And why is it so important?
Well,
what is it about?
Yeah, well, it's a $6 million question, literally. So there's lots of reasons why it's really important. I guess let me start with the avoidance of error. So the problem when people don't speak up is they can see something going wrong. They can see a mistake being made or a process not perhaps delivering appropriately for the people it's intended to. So the person closest to the work sees what's going wrong, but has lost that confidence or that belief that their observations will be taken seriously or even heard. So they stop saying anything. So the situation perpetuates. Mistakes are made frequently, processes aren't improved, and the organization and the team and the people in that situation simply don't learn. So you get a fixed state which isn't improving. So that's probably the most important, and that goes right back to Amy's research, which was in the health service in the US. Where she tripped over a fascinating statistic. So she was looking at health outcomes and looking at the behaviors in teams that were delivering very high health outcomes. And obviously she was expecting a certain set of behaviors to correlate to great outcomes. But there was one anomalous result, and that was that the teams that had the best outcomes in terms of recovery rates and speed of recovery and frequency of recovery were reporting more errors. And it kind of seemed, how can that be right? How can the successful teams make more errors? So she actually went round the research a second time because she didn't believe the results, and the same result came up. And then she had what she described as the blinding flash of obviousness, that actually it's not that they're making more mistakes, it's that they're reporting more mistakes and therefore learning from those mistakes. They're in the public domain in terms of the team, and therefore they're able to deal with them, face into them, take the corrective action. So that's probably fundamentally why it's so important for teams and any organization or group or community to create that atmosphere where all voices can be heard.
I think that's really important, isn't it? It's not just, in reporting errors, because actually reporting an error, that's sort of like the dynamite of psychological safety. Actually, if I can go and say, guys, I've cocked up, I've done this, whatever, and report my error. But you need to be able to take a few steps back and actually start off with, this is how I'm feeling today, and I'm not going to be judged, and I'm a bit upset by this. Let's forget error. Let's just start even with vulnerability.
Just how you feel. So that's again the journey. So I've been working in this area for just about 2 years now. I've probably been working in this area for much longer, but not called psychological safety. But the thing I've learned more recently is that psychological safety is a felt experience. We humans intuitively know, when it's safe and when it's not safe. So you're absolutely right. If I don't feel safe, and I guess I'm perhaps focused on the error side, but the other thing is neither will I speak up with ideas, with creativity, with volunteering my initiative, even if it's only half thought through. But I think there's something here that might be useful for us as a team or a group to work on. But it's that horrible moment when you're in a team meeting and someone says, "So, any questions?"
No, right, let's move on.
And it's like, that means people aren't, you're not hearing the voices. There will be ideas, there will be questions. So if that's a little clue to maybe something's not quite right.
Yeah, and what sort of teams have you seen where psychological safety is really low? What behaviours are you seeing? What's it like to work in one of those teams?
Gosh, it's that's a big question. So let me lucky me, I've been able to work with a number of
got a bit of experience in this, I can imagine.
Teams,
yeah,
unfortunately. And I guess, as you would imagine, every situation is slightly unique. Perhaps if I think of one situation which surprised me, I went in expecting the team to be really psychologically safe. 4 PhDs working in a charity, doing some absolutely amazing, fantastic work, but they were part of the team that the rest of the organization depended on, and the rest of the organization didn't feel they were getting what they needed. So I ended up having a conversation and being able to we have an instrument. Amy's developed an instrument called the organizational scan, which allows you to measure levels of psychological safety, and they were way down in the lowest quartile of scores. And yet, they were, as I say, PhD, they were intelligent people. They were completely committed to the objectives of the charity. They really wanted to be successful, and actually were being successful in their own domains. What had got lost? What had got lost is the value of this team. So they were so committed to the overall goal that they were missing the value of this team and the collaboration and the idea sharing and the accessing of different expertise in order to deliver that. And in fact, all they felt, and I'll use that word deliberately, was the lack of response or the unavailability or the incapacity of that person to respond in the time frame they needed meant that was slowing them down. So they just basically started to ignore each other. So it's not necessarily toxic behavior, it was ignoring. There are plenty of toxic behaviors. Actually, Amy uses this lovely expression. I happen to be a hobby sailor, and she obviously is as well. So the tacking upwind against human nature. So for the non-sailors listening, so if you sail and you want to sail in the direction that the wind's coming from, that's tacking, that's going upwind. And the way you do it is by tacking frequently. You sort of get the wind in the sail that side and then go to that side, think of it. But it's quite a tough sail, it's quite difficult. And so you have to be paying attention. So human nature, I think our own personal egos, our own personal narratives, our own desire perhaps to be heard means that we don't always listen. Yeah, we don't always welcome an opposing opinion, which may be equally valid. Yeah, so our human nature, our tendency to want to be clever, not want to be ignorant, not want to be to show up as incompetent and therefore admit to mistakes, or it means that we tend to defend ourselves, and then the capacity for the system, the team, to hear the bad news or to deal with the difficulties or the absence of knowing what to do becomes harder and harder.
And that is really fascinating, because this tendency for us to defend ourselves, it's so inbuilt, isn't it? I mean, I know that if someone gave me a little bit of feedback about one of the podcast episodes the other day, it was very well intentioned, and I was like, "Ugh," and actually it was really helpful. But my immediate response was, how dare you criticize something I've created? Ridiculous. Yes. So it is human nature, you're right.
It is absolutely human nature. Yeah.
So how do you get to a position where actually no one minds being criticised? How do you get to that situation? That's really difficult, I would think.
Yes, I think, difficult if not impossible.
Okay.
However, you can help create the space for people to acknowledge that instinctive reaction, and indeed help people kind of get beyond it. Yeah. So the absolute key to this is the assumption of positive intent.
Yes.
Yeah. So what you just said, they gave you the feedback and it was well intended. It's your capacity to see that good intention that allows you to step aside from the personal kind of the knee jerk, the reflex reaction. So if I don't believe it's positive intent, then I have absolutely no reason not to attack them, defend myself, do whatever. If I can just, if I intellectually separate myself and say, actually, that person's not meaning to upset me, they're meaning to give me helpful insight. Let me see if I can understand that. Let me inquire into that and seek to learn it. So that's at the heart of it, is the assumption of positive intent.
Yeah, and just thinking about it, I can take criticism. I've been I've been learning to ice skate recently, which I've talked about before, and I'm really bad at it. And I really want well, I'm not doing it at the moment because we're in lockdown, but I really want the teachers to come to me and say, Rachel, the reason you can't skate backwards and turn around on one foot is because your weight's in the wrong place and you're not doing that. And I've been told that, and that is really helpful, and I'm really pleased. So how come when it comes to something in my professional life, we can take feedback about skills and things like that, haven't we? Like, I did it this way. Don't do it that way. Do it that way. Oh, yeah, that works better. But when it's actually, it becomes more personal, and we find it very difficult to maybe assume good intent from people. Is that just a natural thing, or was that a learned behaviour?
I think it's a natural defensive thing. As you could disappear into the amygdala triggering and the historical triggering of your defense reflexes, because actually physically it was quite important that you had lots of adrenaline and lots of capacity to respond to a physical threat. When it's a cognitive, emotional threat, all of that is just wasted energy and counterproductive, because the amygdala is shutting down your prefrontal cortex. You're not getting the oxygen you need there, so you're not actually being able to get that distance. So it is doable. It does take a bit of practice. One of my close partners, he works a lot in the realm of mindfulness, and working to help people get into that slightly different mind state, so that when they then enter a system, they're coming from the right mental state in order to have that conversation. But in lots of business and high pressure situations, obviously it's hard to get back there. So the trick, what I often work with teams on, is just if you're quite often that tension and kind of high energy comes between one or two people. And the rest of the team are kind of almost backing away from the table when we used to sit at tables. But actually, that's their opportunity to perhaps just take a time out, just perhaps play back what they're seeing. So I can see, Rachel, that you think it should be blue. Scott, you seem to be totally locked in and it should be red. What does anybody else think? And that defuses the situation. That gives Scott and Rachel time to regroup, hopefully listen to a few other ideas, and get out of the sword fight, the intellectual and conversational sword fight that we get ourselves hooked into. And no matter how brilliant my arguments are for red, you will have equally brilliant arguments for blue. So we're never going to agree. It needs the bigger group to start to intervene and help move the conversation forward.
Yes, and it needs there not to be any sort of hierarchical imbalance where I win just because I do.
See, these are stripes.
Yeah, exactly. See those? That means that red is important. And I'm thinking that obviously history will make a difference as well. So if if we'd only just met and I went red and you went blue, we'd go, well, let's talk it out. But actually, if there'd been a history of you telling me the wrong thing or trying to usurp my authority or bully, then you're going to dig in a bit more, perhaps, or give in a bit more. I don't know.
Well, yes, as you say, you've got fight or flight, haven't you? You either just roll over, and therefore the argument's never heard, and therefore the better decision is not made, or you just you and I are locked into a fighting partnership. And to your earlier question about toxic behaviours, that is something that happens. Teams get locked in over time into patterns of behaviour. They've kind of got it's like a dance routine, So we know, and I've actually worked with a team, and in retrospect, it's funny. At the time, I wasn't happy, but I was asked to go and work with a team in a electronics organisation, and I was really pleased. It was a new client for me, somebody I'd been talking to for a while, but we hadn't done any work. He said, "Scott, I want you there. We've got this real problem with this team. They seem to be unable to make decisions, and two people in particular seem to be completely locked in." I said, "Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to work with you, Simon. What made you think I was right for this?" He said, "Well, actually, you're the third person I've asked. They've killed the first two."
that is like the team coaching gig that nobody wants.
They chewed up and spat out two consultants already. but helping them see how their behaviour was just a trapped pattern, by literally observing the patterns of behaviour and feeding it back to them and say, "Look, this is what's going on. This is what you're doing. This is what you're doing." everybody else, anybody else get involved in this? How do we get people, how can we change this pattern? And it literally, once they were aware, they were able to make different sets of decisions. And again, the positive intent was there. They both wanted the best for the organization, but they just, as you say, they got so much baggage in this head-banging relationship that they were unable to step out of it. But with just a little insight, a little holding the mirror up, letting them see themselves, they were able to move forward really quickly and independently. They didn't need any training or counseling or anything. They just got it and they moved forward.
Yes. So it is all about what you think the other person's intent is towards you, or what you think they think your intent is. And it got a bit. So I was reading this book last night, The Fearless Organisation, and she talks about the difference between trust and psychological safety, which I thought was really interesting. So now I might get this wrong, Scott, tell me. So trust is when you assume that they have good intent towards you. So, I trust you because I trust you, Scott, that I assume that you want to come on the podcast and talk to me about this without any ulterior motives and etc. I trust that you'll do a good job. Brilliant. But psychological safety, where it is when I am happy that you assume that I have good intent towards you.
Definitely,
right?
Yeah. So the distinction which again I was intrigued to learn is she's quite black and white about it. So trust exists between two entities. So between me and you, or you and me, right, or me and I don't know Colgate because it's a great toothpaste, or I trust that brand. But it's an individual relationship.
Right.
Psychological safety is a systemic relationship. So it's we trust this system. So I might trust you. If you're my boss, I might trust you. And in a one-to-one, I might be very open and very vulnerable and speak up and know that you'll take it seriously. When I walk into the room, join the Zoom, my God, I have to keep correcting yourself. Join the Zoom with all my colleagues. Suddenly, I'm not sure what's going on here. Why is that person saying that? Where are they coming from? Oh, they've got an agenda. They're trying to get resources, budget, time, whatever it is, the manager's intention, or impress the manager with their with their great performance. They're bigging up their performance. So it's the systemic piece. And as you kindly introduced me, I've been coaching teams for about 10 years. And the most frustrating thing about this, the process that I've experienced is I typically will do one-to-ones with all the team members just to get individual perspectives on the team dynamic. And by the end of that, I've got a pretty good picture of what the tension points are and how the relationships stand and what gets in the way of them being really high performing. I then go into a team session with them and I say, look, so I think there's an issue around this. And everyone, don't know what makes it that. So
no, we're all fine.
Well, who said that? So it's not me. And it disappears. Yes. So the beauty of working with psychological safety and indeed the organizational scan that Amy's created is that so far, and where's the wood? I'll touch wood. You can't see it. Trust me, I'm touching wood. Every time I've been able to facilitate a team using this, it surfaced the right issues. So the elephant is boldly painted in the room and we can deal with it. And actually, just like my story earlier about those two antagonistic leaders, once the elephant's in the room, the team is very capable of sorting it out between them. Until it never gets addressed. It just festers, it just gets in the way and kind of creates resentment. People will talk about it as they walk out of the meeting with each other. So you and I, God, that thing that John said in the meeting, that was a load of rubbish, wasn't it, Rachel? But we won't, in the meeting, we'll just let John rabbit on and say what he wants to say and just leave it. Yeah. So there's that speaking up again.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, I mean, what can you do about it? If you're working in a team where there isn't psychological safety, maybe because of the actions of one bully who's there, or several bullies that are there, and it doesn't need to even need to be bullies, does it? Because I've certainly worked with teams where people have been so passively aggressive by just not doing anything, not being accountable, not turning up to stuff, and everyone's so nice, no one will say anything to them.
Yes.
You just feel completely stuck. Can you solve this without a team coach?
Of course not. In fact, you
You really need team coaches.
Can we just be clear? You did say you trusted me not to use it. Here's my sign.
That's not what I meant, but
Sorry.
yeah, touche.
The answer is So yes, and so
Yeah.
you need to catalyze the conversation, and that's what an external third party, what AT&T used to call an alien, someone who's not part of the system,
Yes.
just has that capacity to see the system and hold the mirror up to allow people to see for themselves. So that's a critical part of starting the change process.
Mm-hmm.
Then the job of the facilitator or the team coach is to allow the conversation to happen. And that's where your scenario where you may have one or two bullies or people who, let's not even bully, but dominate the conversation and are full of all their opinions. That's where the facilitator can help moderate the share of voice, can draw people in who perhaps naturally aren't speaking up, can help kind of get the orchestra playing in harmony rather than one part of the orchestra dominating, the wind instruments are dominating. It's not a bad metaphor, I might use that. So that's the rate. But I really keen to point out that this is something that you can touch in on and you can do a bit of, and then the team, with the positive intent, with the desire to deal with it, can genuinely move quite a long way under its own steam. It's unlocking it to allow the change to start, which is the key, and then supporting the change, perhaps nurturing it when it's still young and it's still a little fragile and we're not sure. We think we can now speak up, but we're not sure. But quickly, our role as team coaches to encourage them to do it themselves. There's no one way to be a team. Each team has to find its own way, but there are some things that if you don't do or you do wrong are going to stop any team being effective.
Yeah. What if you've got a situation right now and you can identify, right, actually our team is not working, there's not a lot of psychological safety, we haven't got time to get in a coach. What could someone do straight away to start to help things?
Golly, so within kind of what we teach people, there's a whole bunch of signature practices. The shorthand to it all is for the leader to shut up and encourage other people to speak up. So I guess the answer to your question somewhat varies depending if I'm the leader of the team. If you're the leader of a team and you think this isn't kind of working in the way I'd like it to, everyone's just being a yes man, or maybe I'm not getting the ideas, or maybe I'm feeling nobody's taking any initiative or ownership. The temptation is to kind of step in and demand all of those things. The trick is to step back and invite those things. So to kind of create the space. And again, there's lots of different ways of structuring that, but fundamentally, your job is to ask good questions and really listen. Not. So has anyone got any points to make? No, right, then we'll go with my plan. That's not listening. It's like, I've given you an idea about how we might progress, but before we go any further with that, I want to hear from everyone, what their thoughts and ideas are, if there's better ideas or any ideas about how to improve what's on the table, and genuinely listen. And this is the hard bit for most leaders, and acknowledge, welcome even stupid ideas. Because you're acknowledging and welcoming the idea generation rather than the content of the idea. Because if you do that, people will start to come up with better ideas. If you don't do that, then you shut down that process immediately and you don't get anything.
Yeah.
So if you're the leader, that's the trick. Ask, frame the objective. What are we trying to achieve? What's the goal? What's the work we're trying to achieve? And then ask good questions and really listen to the answer. A good way, if you're not good at listening, is try and summarize back. So what you're saying, Rachel, is, because you have to listen to be able to summarize. Here's a free giveaway tip that really effective teams, somebody, not always the leader, but somebody summarizes every 11 to 12 minutes.
Okay, that's interesting.
So
where are we at? Okay, this is where we're at. These are all the things. I think that's
Yeah.
the idea generation thing. Yeah, there's all sorts of things you can do, isn't there? Like, actually turn taking so that everyone can speak up and keep going around until you haven't got anything else to say. And I was reading something
Yeah.
recently about, creativity. Actually, the best ideas often come last, don't they? They don't come first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, so one of the techniques that we work with, which again I'll credit Nancy Klein rather than myself or my colleagues with, is to ask that open question, deliberately turn take, and give everybody 3 minutes. Yeah, have a little timer going on your phone or watch or whatever works for you. And quite often you'll find people stop after 2 or 2.5, and then say, "Is there anything else you'd like to say on that topic?" And as you say, that's where that last bit, when they've kind of stopped talking, because that's all the reflex stuff, you start to access the deeper thinking, and as you say, that's where there's some really, really lovely new novelty, creativity, innovation comes from.
Yeah.
But we haven't got time for that. We've only got 20 minutes for this meeting. We've got to make a decision. So time is the biggest obstacle.
Yeah. So often, so much, and it all got to be process based, and so many, particularly in healthcare, the meetings. You've got an agenda as long as your arm. You've got 10 minutes. People are late for visits anyway, and oh gosh, it just really, really difficult. But I am interested in what you can do as an individual if you're not a leader. If you're working in a team, I'm just thinking, off the top of my head, busy A&E department, your team changes all the time, right? You've probably got 100 different people work in your department, and you have different members of the team. There's maybe 1 or 2 toxic people around causing a bit of not toxic people, but people who are behaving in ways that maybe promote a bit of a toxic culture. There might be some stuff coming down from the top, some leadership by fear, which of course never happens in the NHS, does it? What can you do as an individual to try and promote psychological safety amongst the rest of your team?
Well, so given the scenario you've just described, the answer I'm going to give you is not a comfortable one, but the answer is to vulnerability. So if you remember the conversation we had about our reflexive defensiveness and our wishing to present and present a facade, if the power of vulnerability in terms of what we all know, if one of your colleagues cries, your human instinctive is to care. So that's an extreme example, but a vulnerability in terms of I don't know, or I'm not comfortable, or I don't feel as if I'm being heard, or so it's a risk, obviously, because that vulnerability is always a risk. It's part of the definition of vulnerability. But by doing so, you potentially again role model a behavior that other people. So asking the naive question, how often people say, no, I was wondering about that as well, or I didn't understand that. So that modeling vulnerability would be there. And again, it's with the health warning of the environment, that you're talking about. But we all know that bullies are often they are overcompensating for a vulnerability. So even the bully it won't happen instantly, but might start to learn that demonstrating that vulnerability rather than overcompensating might start to create a space where the team can genuinely collaborate.
Yeah, and showing that vulnerability can be really powerful, because then other people start sharing. I mean, I'm even thinking back to sort of significant event meetings, actually, that no one ever admits that they've done something wrong. Then you go to a significant event meeting where you're discussing a mistake, and then everyone starts going, oh yeah, well, when I did this and then I did this, it sort of gets the ball. And we're not wanting to just sort of, talk about mistakes because, but you can't learn, you can't get better, can you, unless you...
Within the organizational scan, there's 4 dimensions. One of them is attitude to risk and failure. And in my limited experience of working within the NHS, which I will confess to, but that is, I think we spoke about this before the podcast, that is one of the sort of touch, but it is the only way to learn, to do things better, to do new things, to do complex things, is to get on and do it. And the only way to learn is to admit to the mistakes that are going on in those early stage, in that high complexity, in order to address them and resolve them and not make them again. But because of the fear of being marked as a failure, marked down because you made a mistake, potentially even career limiting. That kind of the psychological, the mental model of vulnerability and admitting to mistakes is really hard to sustain. So that's why I put it with a health warning. That it is the most powerful way to do it, but I do understand that it's not always. If you haven't got the safe space in the first place, doing that is like, oh, now I'm walking naked into the lion's den. Who wants to do that?
But it's not impossible, is it? Because you hear stories of, the military or the Red Arrows, they always debrief. You're thinking a pilot, if you make a mistake, that is a really life or death thing, just as in
Absolutely.
healthcare. But they do very detailed debriefs, don't they? I'm told.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I guess that's, once you start to get this working, that habituates. So you make that a habit and a practice. And I don't particularly like the expression, practice makes perfect, but practice makes permanent. Yes. So, and it becomes normal. We talk about our mistakes. In Amy's book, she talks about failure parties, and I won't use the expression, but let me just say F up parties, which team leaders instigate for their team, and they have a laugh, typically in a more relaxed environment, but they have a laugh about the fact that, who made the biggest mistake this month? Oh, it was me, look, I did this, and that didn't work, and all the rest of it. And then all that angst, all that concern about admitting to a mistake is just dissipated. And again, in the book, there's some beautiful examples. Volkswagen, I think, is probably one of the most visible organizational Dieselgate failures, where nobody spoke up. Nobody said, lots of people knew what was going on, but nobody spoke up. I worked extensively in financial services after the crash, and there was this concept of courageous integrity, but you down there, you need to be courageous. Well, hang on.
Yes.
If you're not listening to me, then all my courage does is get me fired, or I lose my promotion or my bonus or whatever. So you have to take it one step at a time, but by introducing that vulnerability, you do start to change the culture, and habituating that and getting people to join in. Suddenly you start to get that positive energy of learning.
Yes, so true. There's another example in the book, isn't there, about Pixar. I don't know if it's in that book or somewhere else. I read that after every time they've made a scene in a film, everyone sits down and pulls it apart, so that it can be made better. Yeah,
absolutely. No, it is in the fitness organization. So I mean, for them, a creative process. It's kind of, I'm working with a design team in a technology space at the moment, and it's really interesting. So I won't name the company, but they have the two levels of design review effectively. So they have a peer level design review where they all sit down, and like Pixar, everybody criticizes and seeks to improve and is open to feedback, and that's habituated and works really well. It then goes to the next level meeting where the boss and the boss's boss and the stakeholders in the whole organization, come and look at what's been achieved. And the first one is very psychologically safe. We measured it and we can see it's very psychologically. Guess what?
Next level up.
The next level isn't. So bless them. The mission for them is to make this senior one as safe as this more junior one. And it is through that process that they'll then be able to access. The benefit of the senior one is these guys and ladies have perspective that the people who are doing the design don't have. So it's actually useful, but it has to be done in a constructive and psychologically safe way in order to be received and used and improve the product.
Yeah, and I think we definitely see that in healthcare, where you actually have quite high levels of psychological safety among certain groups. Maybe some certain staff members in a surgery or certain group member, and then as soon as you get to the level above, when everyone hunkers down, it becomes very defensive. I would just see that all the time.
And again, it is often a given power rather than a take. As in when you just go into that room, you suddenly feel more fearful, because they are more senior, just because they are. They maybe think, it's just good old Fred. I just left my kids. I was doing a bit of school homeworking, home tuition this morning. Here I am now in this meeting, and I'm just me. but because I'm the boss of you, I have all this power, which I don't even realize. So it is a little mind game we play with ourselves. In that situation, it's up to me not just to be me, but to show vulnerability, to welcome people in. So there are some little things that you can do, just checking in at the beginning of your meetings as human beings, and again, acknowledging and welcoming people who say, actually, I'm really tired, I'm really stressed, I've got a real problem with X, why isn't working? It may be personal life rather than work life. So you may think, well, it's completely irrelevant to this conversation, but just a couple of minutes check-in for everyone. And we're now human being talking to human being, and all that status and all those assumptions and kind of paradigms disappear. And we can actually talk to each other as human beings. And that's psychological safety.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think one forgets, the higher up you get in an organisation, you forget how it feels to be lower down. And so I know lots of leaders who don't feel the hierarchy. They say, well, there's no hierarchy, we all get on really well, it's fine. And so they're in a meeting chatting, they don't realise that the people under them really do feel the hierarchy. And it might not be the leader's fault, it just might be the way it is. But the leader just assumes that they don't need to do anything extra to break that feeling, whereas actually maybe just a few well-timed words or a bit of self-disclosure or something like that will just break that ice and let people go, oh no, this isn't like that, it's not one of those situations.
No, beautiful. Really, you're exactly right. And interesting that there's a distinction that I've been using with teams recently, is the difference between comfort and safety. And I think, and it shows up sometimes in the organizational scan. So the leaders are reporting high psychological safety, but they are misreading that for exactly as you described. They're comfortable. They're comfortable in this situation. They understand how this works. They're in charge. So there's kind of no threat to them per se. So they're comfortable, and they're not thinking about safety. They're thinking about comfort. So I'm comfortable, and I don't really care, whether everybody else is comfortable or safe. What you really want is a safe but uncomfortable environment. You want everybody to be safe and uncomfortable, because it's only in that discomfort do we start to trigger the necessary thinking to move forward. If everybody's safe and comfortable, why do we bother? No effort is required. If everybody's unsafe and uncomfortable,
that's a disaster.
That may be more regularly experienced by a lot of people watching this. So you kind of tune up the safety, because there isn't the comfort. So let's be able to talk about it. Let's face into the challenges we're dealing with, and not protect our egos and our identities and all the rest of it, and allow ourselves to learn together. Because no matter how senior you are, I guarantee you don't have all the answers.
100%. I love that thing about needing to be less comfortable and more safe. And in lots of GP surgeries I've been working with, they are unsafe but very comfortable. And then they wonder why processes aren't changing, and they're not getting things done, and they're not having the conversations that they need to have. So we're running out of time, which is a real shame, because we could talk about this for ages. If you had sort of 3 top tips for individuals who want to increase the psychological safety in a team where they're working, what would they be?
Golly, so as a team member, so I think we'll go back to the first conversation we had about that, but that catch yourself when you're getting that defensive ping, and that may be a defensive as in somebody's attacked you and you've taken it personally, or not attacked you, but given some feedback and you've taken it personally, and so you feel yourself leaning in to defend that. Or it may be, I'm afraid to speak up because everybody else seems to know what's going on here, and I'm thinking, I don't think this is the right thing to do, but everybody seems to be going along with it. So how do I speak up? So I think catch yourself first, and that's then that vulnerability. So lead with vulnerability, and it's just that's a sentence that doesn't make sense for a lot of people, but kind of lead with vulnerability. But we're all leaders in that situation. If you've got a question, if you're unclear, then you need to lead the conversation to allow that clarity to be found for everybody, not just for you. And if it's an innocent or naive question, it'll be answered quickly, and that will be great. But at least it'll be answered. And I guess the third and final one is seek positive intent. I avoided saying assume positive intent because that may lead you into a difficult situation, but seek positive intent. In those situations, how can I see that in some way this person is trying to be positive, is trying to move the conversation forward, trying to achieve something for our customers, clients, patients. So what is there and what is going on here that has positive intent, and build on that rather than criticize what might not be so experienced so positively.
Yeah, I love that thing about seeking positive intent, because I think, you know, that applies not just to psychological safety, but also to, I think, everything about how to manage people in the COVID pandemic. Because if, you know, we just need to give each other extra rope. You know, we need to assume that people aren't trying to be annoying to they're not cross with us, they're probably not even thinking about when we get that snappy email. It's probably nothing to do with us, it's probably everything to do with their own circumstances, and they just didn't mean it, and they didn't want to upset us. And people aren't out, mostly they're not out to cause problems for you or be vindictive, whatever, most people.
No, but you're right. Someone said to me the other day, everybody's on shorter fuses. Everybody's, it's all a bit more frayed at the moment. And that's showing up in every aspect of our lives, in every transaction. And so I think that's a really good insight.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Those tips are really good. Catch yourself getting defensive, be vulnerable, and seek positive intent behind whatever anybody does to us. Thank you, Scott. I have to get you back at some point to talk more about teams, because we're all working in teams, and it's when we're in high stress jobs, the teams become high stress, and that can be the difference between, you know, loving our work and absolutely hating our work. You know, the team that we're in, can't we? So it's so important. If somebody wanted to contact you, find out more about your work, how could they do that?
Easiest is to email. So scott.chambers at the number 3ghr.com.
Great. Do you have a website or anything like that, or they can find you?
www.3ghr.com.
Brilliant. hr.com, and then find out more about stuff. And the book we've been talking about is called The Fearless Organisation by Amy Edmondson. It's really good. There's a lot of really good stuff in there, and just encourage anybody who's worried about this or experiencing psychological unsafeties. Is that a word?
Lack of psychological safety.
Psychological safety in their work, and we all do to some extent. Just to read that and think, actually, what small changes can I make today where I am to make this better for me? And if you make it better for you, you're probably making it better for other people. So really important. So absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott, and we'll speak to you soon, hopefully.
Real pleasure. Thanks very much indeed. Appreciate the invitation. Take care,
Bye.
Rachel. Bye.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please share it with your friends and colleagues. Please subscribe to my You Are Not a Frog email list and subscribe to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, then please leave me a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. So keep well, everyone. You're doing a great job. You got this.